Hey everyone, this is Robert Weisman, co-president of Public Citizen with Informed Resistance, Public Citizen podcast series, Substack series, talking with leaders from the progressive community about how we're standing up to Trump and where we need to go. Today, I'm excited to be joined by my friend Adam Green, who's the co-founder of the PCCC. Adam, I'm going to get it wrong. What are all the C's for?
We have so many C's: the Progressive Change Campaign Committee and the Progressive Change Institute.
Okay, and importantly, have adopted the moniker Bold Progressives, which is, I think, encapsulates what you guys are about and what we're going to talk a lot about today. Why don't we start out with just like a real high level view, and then we'll kind of get into some of the theory of what PCCC does and the idea of Bold Progressives. How would you say our team, define however you want, is doing in this period of Trump authoritarianism?
Well, I think our team is getting better, and our team within our team is getting stronger. But we have a lot of work to do, right? If you rewind 10 years, Jamie Raskin wasn't on the block, Maxwell Frost was on the block, AOC was barely on the block, Elizabeth Warren was a freshman senator. The amount of power that's been built and the mainstreaming of the kind of economic populist, anti-corruption, unrig a rig system set of issues that our organizations work on together, the stock has just gone up. The mainstreamism has gone up, and that's a good thing. So one way of putting it is, if our country survives, I think we're on a pretty good trajectory. The problem is we're up against the clock. And if the rest of our side does not figure out soon enough that we need to challenge corporate power, we need to name villains, we need to fight for a little guy against the big guy in a rigged system, there's no such thing as fighting for everybody, well, then we might lose that clock challenge.
Well, you really jumped right in. But before I sort of tease out some of those themes, so it's, you're identifying the problem as the rigged economy and corporate domination. How does that line up with the problem of Trump authoritarianism?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the rigged economy and our rigged politics are two sides of the same coin. It's an overall system that is rigged against everyday people and is consolidating power and wealth in the hands of fewer and fewer oligarchs, many of whom are, tech oligarchs that are backing Trump. Some of these people have said in the past or acted in the past like they were progressive in leaning, maybe on cultural issues more than economic issues. But it's very clear to me that they are willing to look the other way when ICE invades the streets of Minneapolis, arrests citizens for no reason, deports people without due process, and is violent or kills people. If that means that they go less regulated and make billions or $1 trillion more for the companies. So to me, like the tech oligarchs funding Trump, literally being with Trump today as ambassadors from our country to China, is kind of symbolic of the merger of a rigged economic system and political system.
Yeah, it's been a personal peak of mine as people are trying to think about how to construct a big tent to oppose Trump. How often there's talk about reaching out to corporations to sort of come join us. And, that's not my first source of outreach. And I just think that it's to your point, like, on the one hand, they've showed themselves to be the most cowardly. Like when they're threatened, they're the quickest to concede. And on the other hand, they don't really care. Like, at the end of the day, they've got a purpose of making money and they're pretty willing to accept almost anything, it seems, so long as that purpose is advanced.
Yeah, I think it's partly incumbent on folks like us to debunk some of the canards that are put out there by whether it's corporate leaders or just people on the right in general. So to give one, I saw a video the other day of Bernie Sanders at a town hall meeting, and somebody asked him, AI has the potential to make our healthcare better, give us more time with our kids, do X, Y, Z. It sounds like you're a little antagonistic towards that. And that was intended to be kind of a hardball question. And Bernie just looked at this person and was like, Do you think that that's what Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are trying to do? And the person asked the question was like, oh, no, I guess not. Right. So like the idea, and I think that is the tip of the iceberg, right? The idea that these people support capitalism, right? When what they're trying to do is take over the government to rig the regulations and the rules for their companies, right? There's a huge tension there. It's not even a tension. They're opposites. They're mutually exclusive. And the idea that like, oh, these are the smart economic people and we're the crazy like left-wing people that don't believe in that's just wrong. Like as Elizabeth Warren said, like I believe in markets, right? Markets mean consumer protection, truth in information, the same rules for everybody, and the ability for a little guy to get into the marketplace and compete, not the big guys making a decision that, oh, you know what? It's worth 200 million to buy the next president because my stock prices will go up 200 billion after the election. And that's way more beneficial to me than actually trying to create jobs to make that next 200 billion, right? That's crazy. That is not economics. That's not good economics. That's not conservative economics. And I do think that there are some people out there that still operate under very old premises about who's on what side. I kind of feel like, we shouldn't be sucking up to big corporations, but we should be educating people that if you believe in that line of stuff, like actual markets for entrepreneurs and small businesses, we're your people, not these oligarchs.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a diversion, but I testified recently at a Senate the Health Committee hearing on drug prices. The topic of which was, lowering drug prices in markets.
Hmm.
And the chair, who's Senator Cassidy, who's not the worst Republican by any means, preemptively said when Bernie Sanders is going to say we should have socialism and we should violate the rights of these drug companies, and that's the way he's going to say we should bring down prices, but I know how important the drug companies are. And I testified and I said, the core proposal that Bernie has, which is to introduce generic competition faster and to say that the government, as a buyer of drugs, should be able to negotiate prices. Those are market proposals. The problem is you're defending patent monopolies.
Yep.
It has nothing to do with markets, but it's such a propaganda term. You just sort of automatically say we believe in markets, but it's nothing to do with what's actually going on. Anyway, I want to go back to the.
Thank you for doing that. Seriously, like I just want to give a shout out to Public Citizen, the work you do. Like there are not enough groups that have credibility and access and relationships on the inside while having finger on the pulse of the outside. And I'm very thankful that because of the role, the perch that you all play, the perch that you all have, you were invited to be in that hearing and can kind of course correct that record in real time. Thank you.
I definitely persuaded Senator Cassidy.
Well, people who are watching.
I want to go back to that example you gave, though, from Bernie, I think is so important. I just wanted to tease that out. Mm-hmm. So you're saying someone asked him about a question about AI, and he didn't get in, like, he's thought a lot about AI. He's talking a lot about AI, but he didn't talk about, like, the technology. He talked about who's owning and deploying the technology.
Yeah.
And, like, that seems to be, like, just a crucial shift that's emblematic of the kind of line that you've been advocating for since you founded PCCC.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's an unfortunate accident of history that the people in charge right now, whether those who are in charge of the big tech firms and those who are in the Trump administration and some other perches across the world, are in those places at a time that the rules of society are being rewritten. Right? Like if things happen differently, even if it was under Obama, we'd have more benevolent versions of things. But imagine a world where the Elizabeth Warrens of the world, the Bernie Sanders of the world, their allies, like the Paul Krugmans of the world, the Public Citizens of the world, the Progressive Changes of the world, and the people on our side that you mentioned before were in positions to create proper guardrails and proper direction for things like AI. Maybe quality of life will get better. Maybe we could work less hours and have better quality of life, but it's just not the goal of the people who are in charge right now. And, one just small diversion. I'm sure you saw, and I'm sure many of the folks who are watching or listening to this saw the testimony, the legal testimony from the Doge boys. Remember that? And just watching them and thinking like, these are people who are seen in the tech oligarch world as brilliant and as the future, right? These 25-year-old kids, nothing wrong with being 25, but they are seen as the future. And it's like, wow, they have no empathy. They have no humanity. They have no knowledge. And when I say no knowledge, like one of them was asked, "Oh, you got rid of a Holocaust remembrance program. Why was that DEI?" And they were like, "Oh, well, that's discrimination based on gender." And it's like, wow, it's not that you're brilliant and wrong. You're not brilliant and very wrong and not human. And holy cow, you're the people like you are the ones in control of most of these AI companies. That's super scary for me. That means that they're not to be looking out for
Yeah.
most people.
When you talk about economic populism, what does that mean?
It boils down to challenging power on behalf of the little guy. Um, in the public dialogue, it includes being willing to name villains. Our mutual friend Chris Deluzio, who won a very swing Pittsburgh area congressional district and turned it very safe, and is now, kind of tip of the spear economic populism within the Progressive Caucus in Congress, has a phrase that I love. He goes, "Don't tell me what you're for unless you're willing to say who's getting in the way." Right? And I think not enough people on our side are willing to do that. Right? Again, the idea of like, oh, I'm fighting for everyone. That's not a thing, right? When corporate CEOs are attacking workers, you can't fight for everyone, right? When corporate price gougers are attacking families and consumers, you can't fight for everyone, right? When AI is trying to addict your kids and potentially drive them to really bad things through addiction or through invasions of their privacy, you can't fight for everyone. You have to be willing to describe the world you want and say who's getting in the way and actually fight them. And that's what it boils down to for us. What do you think?
Well, I'm pretty into it, but I want to tease it out even more.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, like, I think as I think about it, there's a policy side to it, and there's a political side. So let's do that in order. I mean, you started to get into it actually more on the policy side, but why not just talk about like what AI should be versus talking about how big tech is a problem? How does that help us get to a better policy to be thinking about big tech? Or why can't we just have protections for consumers, for financial consumers? Why is it important to simultaneously be thinking about and talking about the banks from a policy point of view?
Yeah. And even one step beyond policy, a structural point of view, right? We have to acknowledge that structurally things are not set up right now to have the best outcomes for everyday people, right? The example I gave before of it's cheaper to spend $200 million on politics to buy politicians than it is to actually create jobs is a microcosm of the larger point, which is things are just in a bad place where, the rules are rigged in a way that continue perpetual rigging on behalf of the big guys against the little guys. Once you acknowledge that point, you get into things like addressing campaign finance reform, addressing proportional representation in our Congress, addressing the rules of our Congress so that everything flows in the direction of will of the people. And that leads to insert policy here, right? Right now, we're living in an environment where it's if not impossible, very hard to imagine a sequence of events where we will have really enlightened tax policy and childcare policy and healthcare policy and corporate accountability / guardrails on things like AI. It's just hard. Crypto, don't even talk about it. Crypto, DC is on lockdown right now. There is no oxygen in the room on the Democratic side, let alone the Republican side right now, to even propose rational guardrails on crypto. Now, fortunately, that's a small fish compared to AI, which again will rewrite the rules of society. And that's why this moment, like literally like this 2026 year is so important for the people on our side to get with it, name villains, talk about structural change, something that James Tallarico and Graham Plattner and others who are out there talking in public are doing, talking about power dynamics and the need to unrig the system. It has to be shown in the public lore that story is a compelling story for the public so that more politicians and public leaders emulate it. And we have a chance, we have oxygen in the room to have some systemic changes, which lead to policy changes. Does that get to your question, or does that only set the table for the policy conversation you want to have?
Well, I think both. I think like you're saying, actually, there's three pieces to it. And before getting to the policy, we got to acknowledge the structure of society and sort of the wealth concentration, the corporate domination, and that's the framework in which policy takes place. And if we're not talking about that structure, we're already kind of losing the game. Okay, so you did that. Now, in terms of policy, articulate that. So, I mean, if you,
Yeah.
what do we get from sort of keeping these issues of corporate power and central, the billionaire class and all that stuff in mind and devising policy? How does it get us to a different place than just thinking about, you know, providing universal daycare or something?
Yeah. Well, why don't we piggyback off each other's thoughts here? I can get the ball rolling, right? If we have politicians who are not willing to name villains and challenge power, in particular, big corporations and billionaire power, that automatically reduces the universe of policies they could ever fathom advancing, right?
That's
So,
right.
right. So during the Obamacare debate, our organization was big on a public option, like a publicly run health insurance company to compete head to head against private insurance. What we ended up getting were Obamacare markets that have done a fine job at reducing those who are uninsured, but also inherently funnel even more money, everyday people's money and the government's money, to private health insurers, which actually make them more powerful. So, right. So that was kind of like a little deal with the devil. Okay, we'll solve one problem, but we will make the bad guys more powerful. And that's why it's so hard to even advance something like a public option today. It's actually more probable back then than today. Although I still think we should go for it today. That's before Medicare for all,
Okay,
right?
my team can't let you say that. I have to say, no, the public option is going to it's got the same problem. It's going to make the insurers stronger, but we'll leave that for a conversation over beer. Because we're
Sure.
trying to
I
illustrate the
guess
point.
I guess it depends how you structure it. But I mean, but let's just take the public option out and talk about Medicare for all. Just
Yeah.
again, if if those who are advocating for healthcare reform and who genuinely want to help people start from the position of we will not challenge corporate power in a structural way, in a public dialogue way, and in a policy way, then you automatically are in the world of things where we're passing out crumbs, but actually making the bad guys more powerful. That's my point, right?
Yeah.
If you are going to address banking issues and crypto issues and retirement issues, and you're not willing to challenge crypto or the banks, I guess you could come up with baby bonds and stuff like that and like think of some things that will help people around the edges. But wouldn't it be nice to not have people go into credit card debt that just spirals and spirals and spirals all their life? I mean, even Josh Hawley's out there for some version of caps on credit card fees.
Yeah.
He's outflanking a lot of Democrats, right? So I think that's just the point. When you ask, why does either lack of acknowledgement of the structural issues or lack of willingness to full frontal challenge corporate power and billionaire power matter when talking about policy? That's my starting point. Why don't you take the ball from there?
Well, I think you led up to the other piece, which is that they actually are the problem. So if you don't talk about corporations, you're not talking about the problem. Almost you're defining the problem wrong, and so you get solutions that are either wrong or inadequate. Which is exactly
Right.
like the problem with health insurance actually is the insurance industry.
Yeah.
Like the problem with, I mean, the banking is a great example. Like, to talk about protecting consumers from financial wrongdoing without saying, well, there's people actively trying to cheat consumers. You're just like, first of all, you're just like, it's a weird conversation because that is the problem. And second, you're going to come up with the wrong things. Or maybe you end up talking about, like, you're allowed to talk about, total scammers because they're not established. And that's like, scamming is a huge problem in the economy. But you don't get to the more central things. So you sort of defined yourself out of where you need to go. So I think,
Yeah.
I just really admired your insistence on this because I just think it drives you to the right place. And actually, if you don't do it, you almost can't get to the right place. Or you create really convoluted solutions, or you think about how you could have you redesign incentives in some weird way for corporations to stop doing what they're doing to you without acknowledging that they're doing it to you. Um, I think it's true for little problems, and it's true for big problems like climate or AI. If you don't talk about the corporate perpetrators, you're just going to come up with solutions that don't meet the moment.
Yeah, I think your shorthand of wrong and inadequate is a perfect way of summarizing it.
And
There's another.
although we're not going to, you work on elections, we don't. We don't want to talk about elections, but just in terms of popularity, um, what do you get from economic populism? I know the answer to this question, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, it's how we take back power. Right. The other side wins if they're able to set the agenda and find the most 50-50 or 60-40 in their direction, cultural divide issues that actually don't impact most people's lives. And we win if we can appeal to people on a cultural side of things, but working people cultural issues, right? So again, like if you ask Bernie Sanders, what do you think about trans bathroom laws? You can predict that he'd probably say something to the effect of, I don't give a damn about the bathrooms. I'm trying to raise people's wages here and their quality of life. And the thing is, he's actually believed because that's his track record. And most people will be like, oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Let's talk about that. Right. It's just reframing the agenda. But if you're not willing to pick the fight on economic issues, we actually relegate ourselves to the other side setting the agenda. And that's exactly, in my opinion, what happened to Kamala Harris, where she did, we were so rooting for her in that debate against Trump to pick a fight on corporate price gouging, billionaire taxation, anything that would challenge corporate power. Our team was standing by, waiting to clip video and put it on the various social media channels. There was not one punch thrown on economics. Some beautiful answers on abortion, some fine answers on democracy, but not one punch thrown. So she didn't have a willingness to do it, right? That's a huge problem. And then, of course, that opens her up to attacks in TV ads saying that she's on the wrong side of other cultural divide issues. So, I think Bernie Sanders and people like that would be less susceptible to those attacks, given how credible they are and in touch with culture on working people's issues.
Yeah, and weirdly on the defensive on economic issues too. I mean, Trump became the populist.
Yeah.
What? So obviously, we're friends and we completely agree on this. But so I think the case is so obvious, but it's not obvious to everybody.
Yeah.
So why not?
So why not what?
Why isn't the case obvious? I mean, why do people not like?
Yeah.
One general rule that I think usually works is that politicians pursue their self-interest.
Yeah. So, this also partly is an answer to your prior question about, what is the role of economic populism in terms of public popularity? One of the best years of my life was spent in South Dakota on a U.S. Senate campaign back in a day where there were Democrats elected from the Dakotas. It was actually a time where we had 4 of them in the 4 Senate slots there. And I was working for one of them, a guy named Tim Johnson. And the year that we were running, this was shortly after 9/11, a year where Democrats ultimately got wiped out across the country, the Farm Bill was up. And he was authoring a provision of the Farm Bill that would basically protect little guy family farmers from giant ag monopolies, gobbling them up. Super popular with farmers, not popular with giant ag monopolies, who took out full-page ads in every newspaper across the state, blasting him. And a lot of people thought, oh, wow, that's controversial. He's probably going to reverse his position. And he thought about it for about 2 days and then was like, you know what? I'm going to fight for this. I believe in it. And Adam, I was press secretary. Your job is to pull together a press conference announcing my decision. So pull this event together, and these farmers and ranchers drove from up to 4 hours away to be in this room. And the back of the wall, back of the wall was filled with every reporter in the state of South Dakota, which is like 6, right? And they were, waiting to see what the announcement would be. And the worst nightmare for a press person happened to me, which was a random dude stands up, marches to the podium, grabs the mic and says, I have something I want to say. Right? This is like my first event with my new boss, right? And I'm like, oh my God, it's going off the rails really quickly. And he goes, look around this room. Look at all these cowboy hats. I'm like, all right, what's he going to say? It's like pretty much every one of us is a Republican. And we're standing with Democratic Senator Tim Johnson because he's fighting for our family farms. And of course, every reporter scribbled, and I was like, you're welcome, sir, plan the whole thing, right? But because this was a very live fight that year, every other event we did was about this issue. So like healthcare, ag, Social Security, ag, education, ag. And I would spend hours on the phone with these folks. And these are evangelical, gun-owning, never voted Democrat in their life people who were willing to cross party lines for the first time in that election because the economics cut so close to the bone for their families. It was really a point of pride. Again, I said culture, like working class stuff is a cultural issue. Like this is land that had been in their family for generations, and their pride of keeping that land was on the line. And they were willing to put that above abortion, gay marriage at the time, gun laws at the time. And that has always, and I should say, we won. We won by 527 votes in a 20-point red state in a year the Democrats got decimated after 9/11. And then I had no self-identity as a progressive back then. I didn't really know what economic populism was. But a couple of years later, when there was a very vibrant debate about the future of the Democratic Party, and some were advocating for the kind of old DLC corporate Democrat model, and the other, people like David Sirota were arguing for prairie populism, I was like, I was not privy to this choice, but if that's the choice, I know where I'm standing, right? And I've been surprised since then when reporters in DC ask questions like, why are you asking Democrats in swing districts or politicians in swing districts, some independents, to walk the plank by doing bold things like taxing billionaires or challenging insurance companies? Like, those are moderate districts, so shouldn't we have moderate solutions? And I'm like, wow, you really do not get that this is actually how to win in purple areas and bring new people to our side, right? They just conflate these stupid labels of moderate and left and this and that. And just to understand that we have like 80, 90% supermajorities on so much of the stuff that challenges corporate power and fights for everyday people if we're believed. And I think that's why it's important that groups like Public Citizen, like Progressive Change, like others, Working Families Party, are out there proving that these are mainstream issues and the path to supermajorities, not fringe issues.
I just want to say for folks who are listening and watching, who says 80 to 90%, that's not just numbers thrown off the cuff. If you look at polling on all the issues we're talking about, the low end is 70% approval, but you do get to 80 and 90%, which are just unfathomable levels of agreement on things like raising the minimum wage or cracking down on executive pay or breaking up big corporations, controlling big tech, advancing positive environmental regulations, even when they're deceptively and wrongly compared to job loss, dealing with excessive drug prices, cracking down on health insurance abuse. It's all like 80 to 90%. But then still there's the question, because if that's all true, why is it so hard to make the case to politicians to do it?
Yeah, well, two quick answers. One is just corporate donors, and the other is just bad conventional wisdom. So in corporate donors, again, if you are reliant on these big corporations, if culturally you're more comfortable hanging out in a fundraising room with CEOs than you are doing grassroots fundraising and doing the sometimes risky things that lead to someone like AOC being the biggest fundraiser in Congress through small dollar donations, right? But you have to take risks to do that. You don't know on the front end that will happen. If you're not willing to do that, then you're not going to challenge corporate power and you're not going to do the popular things. And if you say, I want to tax billionaires, but all you do all day is raise money for super PACs from millionaires in $1 million, increments, you're not going to be believed, right? And I think we do have a believability problem in some cases where folks like Chuck Schumer, who we have called on to no longer be a Democratic leader, there is no way possible, no matter what 70% poll he repeats challenging corporate power, he will ever be believed on that. Whereas someone like, Dan Osborne, if he made it to the Senate as an independent, or Grant Plattner, who we're supporting in Maine, or people in the Senate right now, like Chris Murphy or Chris Van Hollen, if they were to come out for the same exact things, busting up monopolies, which is, part and parcel of what Chris Murphy is advocating for these days, they'd actually be believed. And I think that would help repair the brand of our entire side. That's number one. Number two, conventionalism. I have to engage you on this one, just as a matter of venting. This will be free therapy for me. But we're familiar with.
That's what we're here for. Call anytime.
Thank you. We're familiar with the group Third Way, right? Third Way. We actually back in the day smoked them out and got them to admit on the record that the majority of their funding comes from Wall Street and giant CEOs. There are big headlines if you Google it about that, with them on camera saying it. And they call themselves a center-left think tank. I would call them a corporate-funded think tank. And on some things like immigration, they might have some polling that gives some good advice to Democrats. I don't know. But on anything related to economics, they're just wrong. And they are urging Democrats to take really bad political advice. And my microcosm here, sorry for invoking the public option again, but back when that was the left flank of the Obamacare fight, and again, a publicly run insurance company, not giveaways to insurance companies, but when it was worded in the New York Times poll as, do you support a publicly run, government-run competitor to private insurance? which is not how most people at the time would have worded it if they were trying to get good poll results. Nonetheless, it was like 80% popular with the public, I think 70% with independents, and 50% of Republican voters supported that at the time, right? 0 Republican politicians, but 50% of Republican voters were fine with a government-run insurance program to compete with private insurance. Third Way looked at that same poll, and they look at the demographic question in that poll, and only 20% of people call themselves liberal, right? Which says something. Even moderates, even some people on the right support these big, bold ideas that challenge corporate power. But they say that they'll then issue memos to Congress and say, look, only 20% of people are liberal, and the public option, or insert whatever other policy you're talking about, is a liberal idea. So don't walk the plank by supporting this liberal idea. So they basically use this like weird fake labeling proxy as opposed to actually caring about public sentiment because they know they're wrong on public sentiment, right? And I've heard this from people who have run for office in the past who are like, I campaigned primarily on economics, primarily on 70-30, 80-20 issues, but I was called too left by my primary opponents who were taking giant corporate checks. And because scared electability voters weren't discerning between left on what, they just thought, oh, well, we need to win in the general election, so we better just moderate and trim our own sails. And they just missed the point that they're being basically called too bold on popular issues and that they actually would have been better positioned for the general election. So again, that is just an abuse of language in a way that muddies the conventional wisdom. And I would say most pundits on TV aren't thinking like this. Most pollsters aren't thinking like this. They will easily use the word left or liberal or this or that in a way that marginalizes bold economic populist ideas. And that's why, again, it's really important that infrastructure exists that has access to political leaders and can make the case that this is how they should move forward if they want to win.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I mean, I just want to, we're going to wind down, but I just want to flag two pieces of what you just said. On the conventional wisdom piece, there is an actual authentic conventional wisdom, which is a problem. But also, as you, I think, importantly point out, it's also a cultivated conventional wisdom.
Yeah.
So it does kind of exist. It's an actual problem, but it's an actual problem that's stoked by the corporate interests. So it's not a totally organic phenomenon of what the conventional wisdom is.
No.
And then on the other side, obviously the corporate money is just, is the connecting tissue of all of this stuff. And I think it's easy to be really crude talking about the corporate money because sometimes it actually is as simple as there's a lot of money and people just go for where the money is.
Yeah.
But there are nuances to it as well, which I think you highlighted. And it's a good point talking, using where culture is used in really weird ways in talking about politics, but highlighting this element of culture. And one person who was very clear about this and did a really good job of describing it was Barack Obama. Before he was president, in one of his books, talking about the experience of spending time with really rich people, raising money from really rich people, and how that started to shape what he was thinking about and whose problems he was sensitive to, and what was foremost in his mind, and what seemed reasonable, and what things seemed maybe not great but tolerable because you weren't living the experience of the paycheck to paycheck or not having enough of a paycheck. And I think that's an underappreciated part of the corrupting element of big money in the campaign finance system.
Absolutely. I could add many anecdotes to feed that point, but you're 100% right. Can I attempt to end on a positive note?
We'd like to do that. Why don't you end on a positive note and tell people how they can get more information?
Sure. Well, boldprogressives.org is our website. Bold Progressive is generally our handle. My handle's Adam Green in most places. So activism matters, right? And I would just recall that during the height of the Doge days, when Trump was coming in on a rampage, Elon Musk was in the driver's seat, things seemed really hopeless. And there were a set of people across the country that started protesting at Tesla factories and dealerships, right? And it was unclear whether that would have any impact whatsoever. And you fast forward a few months, and Tesla stock prices dropped. The Tesla board was freaking out. Pressure was coming in behind the scenes toward Elon Musk in a way that expedited his departure from government, actually prematurely before his time was up. And then a lot of his people had to leave with him. And that's I hold that out as an example of sometimes you don't exactly know how the activism will work, but activism matters. Same with No Kings, right? I mean, you guys were like right in the middle of the early, before they were called No Kings protests. And it was like, why are we meeting on the National Mall? Why are we meeting in state capitals? Does Donald Trump really care if people are meeting in Trenton, New Jersey? Like, right? And by the second No Kings, it was reported in the national dialogue as a symbol of public growing dissatisfaction towards Trump. And you started seeing cracks in the Republican dam that I would argue wouldn't have happened if there weren't mass expressions that were growing expressions from month to month, from quarter to quarter of the year. But again, when people walked, drove to and then walked out to their local protests, like they didn't know at the time. So how do we ever compete in an environment where we're up against hundreds of millions of dollars of dark money, and can never go dollar for dollar? That's where infrastructure and organizing actually matters. And they will have to pay for AstroTurf in a way that we have real grassroots. If they want to do this Tesla protest on their side, they would have had to pay millions and millions and millions of dollars to have people show up, right? Whereas some people took a leap of faith and did it. So as you get activist emails from Public Citizen, Progressive Change Campaign Committee, Working Families Party, Move On, whoever else, I would just ask people who might be feeling on the verge of having hope or not having hope to take a leap of faith sometimes and know that cumulatively it really is how we beat big money and take back power for our side.
That was perfect. Everybody, that was Adam Green, co-founder of the Progressive Change Campaign Committee. This is Robert Weissman, co-president of Public Citizen with Informed Resistance. Thank you for being with us. We will be back again next week. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.